Hello, Read 581, and welcome to week 12. This week we are talking about strategies for comprehension part 2, looking at that informational text piece. So readings support that. Information in this screencast will also support that. Kind of nice. We have one more week of instruction, and then after week 13, we will enjoy our fall recess. I know that's been hard earned, so that's something to look forward to. As is the end of the semester, we really only have 3 more weeks of instruction after this week and just 2 more intervention sessions after this week. Your readings for week 12 are chapter 12 of Instructing Students, which is on comprehension of informational text. And then also the core teaching reading sourcebook, chapter 15, is focused on the comprehension of informational text. There is a lot of crossover between the two resources, so feel free to skim chapter 15. Although the nice thing about the core reading sourcebook is it's very explicit in how to deliver some of the comprehension lessons. It's a little more detailed if you were to actually go and implement some of these things, show this, say this, do this, model this, etc. So they even give you a pretty comprehensive look at rolling out the QAR question answer relationships. So definitely take a look at both of these, but prioritize your Instructing Students chapter. You're probably tired of seeing this slide because we've been looking at it since week 6, but just want to remind you of what's coming up and where we have to go still with the course. So this week you will submit WIPers for session 7 and 8. That's the last formal collection of those. Next week, we talk about students with severe needs. Then we have our fall break. Then we wrap up with ELLs and special needs. The video reflection is going to be due that week. If you want to submit some WIPers from sessions 9 and 10, you can. However, those sessions will primarily consist of your end of intervention assessments, which will then be reported in your final assessment report, which is going to be due week 15, 16. So keep these things on your radar. WIPers this week, week 14 video reflection due, and then the week after that is when all of the remaining assignments are due. We are in this part of the coaching cycle. I started doing the observations and the post-observation debriefs, which are going very well. So just a reminder to get your video observation to me via Google Drive at least 3 days prior to our scheduled meeting time. Please consult the Google Doc where you have signed up and take note of your time, as I'm not sending out reminders, so make sure you know what time we're meeting and you send your observation to me 3 days in advance. So again, assignments due this week, you're doing intervention session number 8, and then you're submitting WIPers for session 7 and 8, and that's your last submission of those. Keeping on your radar that your observation video should be happening sometime in the next few weeks, as well as that post-observation meeting. After week 13, we get our fall break, hallelujah. And then week 14, video reflection number 2 is the big assignment due there. And then week 15, 16, the final progress report and caregiver letter is due. So 3 kind of big assignments due, one right after the other there. So, you might want to use your fall break strategically to get some of that work done. All right, really fast, I just want to highlight some things from the readings regarding strategies for comprehending informational text. And honestly, comprehension strategies for narrative work just as well with informational text. There are a few that are catered more toward informational text. And then good comprehension instruction, right? Being explicit, involving a lot of teacher modeling and practice opportunities for students with feedback are also going to be beneficial when teaching comprehension of informational text. So Good comprehension instruction, carries over, doesn't matter the genre, as well as, teaching of comprehension strategies are beneficial. You just want to be strategic about which ones you're selecting based on the genre. So this week, still focused on these same objectives of really looking at research-based strategies to develop your individualized and effective instruction that's going to accelerate your student learning. And that's the nice thing about the course text and the core reading source book, is that everything in here has been research-based. And in chapter 12 that you're reading, they give you the research and tell you what the research shows. So what they're recommending is not just some cute thing that you find on Teachers Pay Teachers that hasn't been researched. Okay. All right, so Instructing Students, Chapter 12. As a reminder, informational text, sometimes called expository text, is written to communicate facts and ideas. And as you read about last week, it is often more challenging for students for a number of reasons. First of all, the text structure is a lot of times more complex. Just the way concepts are presented in written language is, more dense. The text structures, right? That's what we're talking about, are different. So it's important to teach students the different types of text structures they might come across in informational material. Background information is huge with informational text, because most of these texts are written to convey new information. So it stands to reason that readers are going to have less prior knowledge to bring to the selection because of the fact it is written to communicate new information. A third factor is specialized vocabulary. So thinking about textbooks and all the new terms they present that aren't typically in a reader's oral language. So they need to have knowledge of these words, be able to learn them and understand them in context. Also, to complicate matters, individuals are not only to comprehend the information, but they're also trying to retain and learn things like the specialized vocabulary, so that makes it even more challenging. Readability levels of a lot of content area texts are actually written at levels higher than the level for which they're intended. And then lastly, the density of the text has a lot of facts and content and information densely packed into, a smaller amount of space. So informational material is definitely challenging for students, and you need to be aware of the reason why it's challenging so you can better prepare your students to meet that challenge. And as I already told you, key principles of excellent comprehension instruction hold true regardless of whether the texts are informational or narrative. So the explicit teaching of strategies that foster strategic reading are going to help your reader no matter the genre. Also in this chapter, toward the end, I wanted to make sure you caught this. After they go through all the different strategies, they talk to you about metacognition and how it can be taught. So on pages 470 and 471, they give you a list of different metacognitive strategies that can be done before reading, during reading, and after reading. So be sure and check that out. They also talk a little bit about metacognition and what it is and how it consists of two parts. First, the knowledge that individuals have about their own thinking. And so, this is being aware of what you're thinking about as you're reading. And a lot of times we're not very aware. It's very subconscious. The times we do become aware is when there's a breakdown in comprehension. And then we say, oh, that didn't make sense, or I don't understand what's going on here, or why did that happen? Or, that's when we kind of become more aware of what we're thinking about, because a lot of times we're in tune with the text. But then the other piece is control that individuals have over their own thinking. So that means doing something about the thinking process if a need for change arises. And both of these things you have to model and teach students, what to think about as you're reading, and then how to adjust what you're thinking about as you're reading if needed. Strategies. Both of the assigned readings give you a myriad of important strategies. I like how the text breaks it down by starting with strategies for, before you read, or they call it introductory guidance. This includes the KWL chart, and they even talk about the KW plus chart. Also using audio visuals before reading. That helps to activate schema and prior knowledge. They talk about pre-questioning, which is a way to draw readers' awareness to the kinds of information that is going to be important when they read. So that helps to focus their attention on those things as they read and will support meaning construction. So also doing like an anticipatory set or anticipation guide where you have questions that you ask the students before reading the text. These could even be statements that are true, false. And so then as they're reading, they're going to be focused on, finding that information to see if what they thought initially was correct or not. And so then you can give it to them after as a form of a post-test. And then lastly, they talk about pre-practicing with different text structures, specifically the cause and effect pattern. And they do a really nice job of describing how to roll out how you would teach cause and effect, which is one of the 5 mentioned text structures on page 683 of the core reading source book. So they give you an idea of how to teach a text structure before giving students a text with that structure. All right, for assistance while reading, they talk about this strategy, which is a new one for me. Well, the name of it, the hierarchical summarization strategy, which essentially means doing a standard outline, but within the outline doing summarizing. So, I hadn't heard that name used before, but this is a great approach. Then the research behind it showed that using this strategy 1 hour per week significantly improved understanding and recall of social studies materials in middle school students. So I don't know that I ever was taught how to appropriately outline a text, but that is very important to do. The next one is inserting questions in the text. This kind of forces readers to pause and focus their thinking as they're reading. The inserted questions can prompt a prediction for an upcoming event in the text, or it can also promote reflection on details that were given. So research supports the use of inserted questions in several studies. Literal questions inserted in text have been helpful, as well as higher level questions interspersed. So you can use different question types. Great idea there. Reciprocal teaching is also mentioned and discussed in great detail. I'm sure you've read about this in your coursework prior. They also talk about, and this was reminding me of last week's content, teaching students how to design and use schematic diagrams and charts, but this time they're talking about text structure. So last time it was, a lot of help with visualizing the text and mapping out the text, and here, really focusing them on the text structure. And then in the core reading source book, they talk about the importance of asking questions as you read. So thinking about, what just happened? Why does this fact in the text matter? Or why does it make sense? So asking the question of why, and then teaching students how to answer questions using QAR, which is mentioned in great detail in the core. And then lastly, they talk about culminating events. So learning journals or reader response. And a lot of research supported the institution of learning journals, because here students are not only thinking about the material that they just read, but they have to engage with it in a personalized way. So this is seen as kind of a way for them to bond and connect with the information. So whether you do a learning journal or reader response, which is talked about in core, that's a great culminating event. Also having students generate their own questions. Summarizing makes sense to do at the end of reading. They talk about extended summaries, and then in core, this was kind of a fun name, I thought, paragraph shrinking or gist statements, which is essentially summarizing. In instructing students, they also mention text reinspection. So sending them back into the text to do some lookbacks and being mindful of how they approach the lookbacks, because you may need to teach some things there. And then lastly, with culminating experiences, they talk about teaching critical reading concepts and the idea of making judgments in reading. And so they mainly focus on propaganda, which isn't the only way to do critical reading, but they talk about the different techniques for propaganda and teaching students those. All right, and then they also have a little section on studying and, how to teach students to be able to learn from informational text and retain this information via note-taking, outlining, underlining, and using study guides. And they didn't really give support to one technique or method over the other. And we're pretty transparent in saying in some studies, note-taking has been more productive than in others. It really depends on the quality of the note-taking happening. Same with outlining. But it seems like the big pattern is that all of these strategies need to be taught directly and fully, and then allow plenty of practice. It was interesting too when they talked about underlining, giving students a text that had, important ideas already underlined for them, and then doing a study to see if that actually helped draw their attention to those things and help them retain those ideas more, and it didn't. But what did help in studying was when students underlined, significant ideas themselves. So having to teach them that thought process of determining if something should be underlined and that kind of thing, how to mark up a text. All right, to wrap up, some resources to recommend for you. I have this book, Nonfiction Text Structures for Better Comprehension and Response, and I've started to use it a little bit with a middle school student I work with. I'd like to get into it a little bit more, but that was something recommended to me. And then I think I've shared this with you before, but these QAR comprehension lessons, they have them written for specific grade levels, and they include, explicit lessons and then the text passages to support. And this is written by, the big names, Al and Raphael, behind QAR. So this is, their direct work. So some ideas of additional resources for you to help support two big strategies to support reading of informational text, teaching of text structures, and question-answer relationships. So I hope you all have a great week. Enjoy working with your student. Be thinking about what assessments you're going to need to give as you wrap up, as well as how you want to honor and celebrate your student at that last session. And I will see you next week. Have a great week.